Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Hello everyone, dear Kardec Radio listeners. I am Vanessa Anceloni, your host, and today we have a very special show. It's about the art of healing and living, and a very special guest will be with us, Dr. Bernie Siegel. When we talk about healing, we talk about the healing of the soul. And the healing of the soul, as Allan Kardec proposed to all of us in the Spirit's Book. When we go to the Spirit's Book, question 556, do certain individuals really possess the gift of healing by simple touch? And the answer of the illuminated minds was, their magnetic power may act to the extent when it is aided by purity of sentiments and ardent desire to do good, for then good spirits come to their aid. It is necessary, however, to distrust the way stories are told by very gullible or enthusiastic individuals. And talking about enthusiastic individuals, we have here in our show today Dr. Bernie Siegel. Who is Dr. Siegel? We all know him. He speaks with his heart. He writes with his loving mind. Dr. Siegel, who also prefers to be called Bernie, not Dr. Siegel, was born in Brooklyn, New York. He attended Colgate University and Cornell University Medical College. He holds membership in two scholastic honor societies, and his surgical training took place at Yale New Haven Hospital. And today he's living in Connecticut, and together with his family, he has a beautiful mission to help cancer patients. He has revolutionized the treatment of cancer. Since his publishing of the first book in '86, Love, Medicine, and Miracles, his life changed. And he brought in a new understanding on healing. And after that, many more teachings. In 2008, Dr. Claudio Petrillo and Silvano Placa brought Dr. Bernie Siegel to a special event with Divaldo Franco, the Brazilian medium who also uplifts many hearts. And he brought in a very beautiful understanding on this very topic about healing. And we'll talk more about healing. And as we were just saying to you, the Spirit's Book by Allan Kardec on question 556 talks about individuals who possess the healing touch. In the understanding, they say, the good spirits, one must always distrust the self-interested claims of persons who exploit credulity for their own profit. So it's very important that we illuminate our minds when we talk about healing. So the question to us right now is, who is our Kardec Radio listener? Many people have been asking. Dr. Saloni, they asked this question, who is our listener? And we have already updated our website, kardecradio.com, to share who is listening to Kardec Radio. We are happy to say that more than 75% of our listeners are in North America. 16% in South America, around 6% in Europe, and we have a smaller percentage, but also in Asia, Africa, and Australia. Can you believe it? It's because the world is in need of this uplifting message, for sure. And Kardec Radio is expanding. In the very near future, we're going to have more programs, more days of the week, because I know many of you are willing to hear more. And what countries are also listening to it? The beauty of it all is to know that we are listening to Kardec Radio in countries, mostly 70% of our listeners is in the United States of America. And then due to the Spiritist community in Brazil, we have 14, almost 15% in Brazil, then 6% in Canada, almost 3% in the United Kingdom. We have a smaller percentage in Australia and other countries. Actually, there are 28 countries with Kardec Radio listeners. And in the United States itself, we have 30 states with Kardec radio listeners. And amongst the top states, we have Maryland, Virginia, Massachusetts, Florida, New York, California, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and of course, it's not a state, but it's our loved Washington, D.C. as well. Kardec radio listener, if you are there and you want to get a car bumper sticker, you'll be on. Call us, send in his email, go to our website, kardecradio.com, and contact us by saying, making a question, making a suggestion, and put in your address. We're going to mail you a beautiful Kardec radio listener, so Kardec radio sticker, bumper sticker, so you put in your car and enjoy sharing this good news. If you want to call in to talk to Dr. Siegel, ask him a question, just call 858-769-4705. And we are here for those who just connected to us, tuned in. We're talking about the reflections on the art of healing and living. And a very most special guest, Dr. Bernie Siegel, will be with us. He is this amazing oncologist who has opened a revolutionary way of treating cancer patients. And he put a new element in treating patients, love. That's why in '86 he published this amazing bestseller, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And in this September, he's going to publish a book entitled A Book on Miracles. In 2008, he was in an amazing event with Divaldo Franco, organized by the Hospital of Norwalk, Connecticut, and coordinated by Dr. Claudio Petrillo and his wife, Dr. Silvano Plock. And before we talk to Dr. Siegel, we want to enlighten ourselves about the teachings of healing. Today, it's amazing to know that everywhere and elsewhere on the earth, people are talking about healing mediums, healings, people who have this ability to heal. And the healing part of us come with special elements. Let's say there's an equation in the universe, an equation that combines the loving force of our Creator God, plus our own free will, not a free will only in this life, but a continuum of many lives in immortality. And then there's also the influence of our connections that we sow, the seeds of our actions and connections with our minds, other minds. And it reminds us of a passage of Jesus when he was doing that famous gathering in St. Peter's Peter's home. And many people, the crowds were taking over the whole house. There was no space anymore to go through the front door, back door. And there was this man who was paralyzed. And people felt very compelled to help him out, so they helped him go through the roof and to get into the house and to see Jesus. He wanted to be healed and walk. So he got in, Jesus healed him, and he left walking. Later in the day, there were Peter and Jesus walking by the beach. And Jesus was quiet, very meditative, while Peter, just like a child learning the first steps on healing, he was talkative a lot. He talked and said, "Hey, Master, I know it's a happy day. We healed so many people." And the Master is quiet. And Peter's talking, and he's excited about the many amazing things that happened that day. And he said, and he turned to Jesus and observed that there were tears rolling down the face of Jesus. And he didn't even ask anything. He just said, "Yeah, I know, Master, you were very moved by the healing powers of today. Look at that man and that woman and that child." And then Jesus turned to him and said, "Peter, my tears are not of joy. My tears are actually of sadness, And he said, why, Master? Because my tears come. Because we are here, Peter, not to heal the body, but to heal the soul. The people whom we healed, do you know where they are at this moment? I tell you. That very man whom people helped out to bring them in through the roof, do you know where he is now? He's at a bar, drinking and having a lot of women. He forgot about the most important things in life, which are not only the healing of the body and the enjoyment of this physical life. So, Peter, do you think my Father sent me here to heal the body? So, in this show, dear listener, we're talking about the healing of the soul. And before we go to the first break to call in our dear Dr. Siegel, or as he says, call me Bernie, we'd like to introduce to you a beautiful case of the spirit in the book Heaven and Hell by the amazing scholar Allan Kardec, when he discloses to us this interesting story about what he called the ambitious scholar. It's going to be in 2 parts. Just listen to it, please.
Excerpt from the book Heaven and Hell, entitled An Ambitious Scholar. Mrs. B. from Bordeaux did not have to endure the poignant anguish of poverty, but she was a martyr to physical suffering due to a long string of serious illnesses of which she had been the target for 70 years, from the time she was 5 months old. For nearly every year of her life, they had brought her to the brink of death. 3 times she had been poisoned by the tests that a dubious science conducted on her, and her constitution, ruined as much by medications as by the illnesses themselves, rendered her prey until the end of her days to intolerable suffering which nothing could relieve. Her daughter, a Christian spiritist and medium, asked God in her prayers to soften her mother's cruel trials, but her spirit guide told her to simply ask for her to have the strength to bear them with patience and resignation, and then dictated the following instructions. In human existence, everything has its reason for being. There is not one single suffering that you have caused that does not find an echo in the sufferings you endure. There is not one of your privations that is not the result of your excesses. There is not one tear that falls from your eyes that is not meant to cleanse a wrong or sometimes a crime. Therefore, as cruel as they might seem, patiently and resignedly bear physical and mental pain, and imagine the farmer whose limbs are broken with fatigue, but who nonetheless continues to work without stopping, because he always has before him the golden ears of corn that will be the result of his perseverance. This is the fate of the unfortunate beings who suffer in your world. The aspiration to happiness, which must be the result of their patience, will render them resistant to the ephemeral pains of humanity. Thus, it is for your mother. Each pain that she accepts as an expiation corresponds to a blemish erased from her past. And the sooner all the blemishes are erased, the sooner she will be happy. Lack of resignation renders suffering sterile, for then the trial will have to be recommenced. So, what is most useful for her is courage and submission, and that is what you must pray for God and the good spirits to grant her.
Dear Kardec radio listener, you were just listening to the narration of one of the amazing cases brought in by the spirits at Kardec's time. And this is the first time about the story about an ambitious scholar, and we'll get to know more in the second part why this lady got so ill that life. Her spirit mentor actually comes and tells us why. Before we disclose that and call in and open the line to Dr. Siegel, we send you a few messages.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday, live, Evolution in Two Worlds, a journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, Andrea Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
And now we return to our program.
Kardec Radio listener, here we are live on the show about reflections on the art of healing and living, and we have here our line open to our dear guest, Bernie. Dr. Bernie Siegel, hello. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, it's perfect. How are you, Dr. Siegel?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us in this very exciting show about the reflections on the art of healing and living. And we are here to learn from you about the much, since 86 when you published the first book on love, medicine, and miracles. Dr. Siegel, can you share with us how you went from the traditional teachings of medicine into this new realm, revolutionizing the practice of medicine the way you did?
Well, first, I was willing to deal with the pain of being a physician, all the things we're not trained to do, in the sense of caring for patients, coping with loss and death and all these things. And so I sought help from other physicians who were doing workshops and retreats. And I noticed that no other doctors were ever there, just the room was filled with patients. And one of them was a young woman, and I never forget her sitting down next to me and saying, "You're a nice guy. I feel better when I'm in the office with you, but I can't take you home with me, so I need to know how to live between office visits." And that really redirected my life, because I realized if I help people live, I can't make them immortal, but if I can help them live, then I've done something for them. And so I offered longer, better lives to 100 patients in a letter from our office, now expecting hundreds of people to show up because, my assumption is if you have a life-threatening illness, why not go to a meeting that could help you? And less than a dozen women appeared. So number one, I realized I don't know the people I'm taking care of and their will to live. But number two was with this special group that my wife labeled as exceptional cancer patients, I saw that literally if you help people live, they didn't die when they were supposed to. In other words, if you began enjoying your life, it affected your body, and your body at certain times even had a so-called incurable disease disappear, but it certainly extended your lifespan. And I had enormous criticism back then because, number one, if I said to people, "What's going on in your life?" it meant I was blaming them for getting sick, and there were no studies on laughter and loneliness and love, and, it was all seen as crazy. And as the years have gone by, suddenly it's not so crazy, and there's science behind it and how we communicate, the internal chemistry and how it affects the body and a whole host of things. So things that poems might have been written about, doctors would say, just because it rhymes doesn't make it true. And then 30 years later, studies will show you that what the poet saw and wrote about was true in terms of relationships and connections and, things like how retirement affects men, how loneliness affects everyone in terms of immune function. And you can literally measure this with actors, that you give them a script that's full of laughter and comedy, and their immune function improves and their stress hormone levels go down. And then you give them a tragedy to perform, and the opposite happens. So, we see actors getting sick on Broadway when they're in a depressing play, in a tragedy, and they can't make it through the winter. And then somebody else is in a comedy, like a Mel Brooks thing, and has no trouble getting through the winter, doesn't get sick, and so forth and so on. So it's all, very practical and scientific. And those are the things I've kept working with in support groups for over 30 years, what I call survival behavior, that there are personality characteristics to people who exceed expectations. And that's something doctors don't teach you but should. If they said you have a certain illness, and then they could say, all right, now here's a list I want you to look at, personality characteristics, behavior, so that you will behave like a long-term survivor, rather than saying, here, take your pill, and you have 6 months to live. Our words can kill people, too. That's something I learned, that you can kill people with your words by taking their hope away. And I've seen this happen to people. It's just so tragic. And doctors need to be trained on how to talk to people. Part of the spiritual things when you were, at the beginning of the hour, Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, had a wonderful sentence that I just so enjoy. He said, what if Jesus was the only normal person who ever lived? Now, I love that, see? And that's what I try to get across to people. We have a potential. There are things that you are capable of. If you're worried about guilt, shame, and blame, and I did it wrong and I didn't love enough, hey, I can't help you. But if you say, yes, let me give it a try. Let me participate. Let me take some responsibility. Let me see what I can accomplish. And it's very hard, however, if you haven't been brought up with love. I mean, if you didn't have parents who made you feel worthy but were indifferent or rejected or abused you, it's very hard for you to then take care of yourself. And that's not just when you're facing a disease, but what you're eating, exercise, a whole host of things. Harvard students were asked, did your parents love you? If the answer was no, in midlife, let's say about 35 years later, 98% of them had suffered a major illness. If they said, yes, my parents loved me, about 28% had. And go into an assisted living facility, because I work with a lot of seniors too. You say, did your parents love you? Almost every hand in the room goes up. Yes. I said, yeah, that's why you're still alive, you see, because you grew up with that love. But go into a high school and say to the students, write a suicide note for homework and write a love note. See why you're worth loving, why you should commit suicide. The suicide notes are 3 to 5 pages long, and most kids never even fill a page on why I'm worth loving. And, plenty of studies show you that 70% of high school students have contemplated suicide. And I may say to everybody out there listening, I was surprised one day at a weekend retreat with all kinds of speakers. We were all having lunch together, and all of these famous, well-known, healers were talking about when they were suicidal. And the funny part was I said to them, I've never been suicidal. And they said, we know you're not normal. But I grew up with love. That's a whole separate story about my grandmother and so forth. But, what occurred to me later in my reading was that these were people who had the courage to choose life. They really came to a point where they thought, okay, suicide is an option. But then they turned away and they chose life. And that's why they have become healers and teachers to others, because they chose life and learned from their pain and used it. And that's the part that's very hard for people to do. But I always say, eliminate what's killing you. Care for yourself. Ask for what you need. Say no to things you don't want to do. All these are very important, but many of us haven't grown up with what I call mottos to live by. We grow up with mottos to die by.
And Dr. Siegel, everything's so inspirational what you're saying. And as a scientist myself as well, I recognize that one of the first obstacles you may have faced, as you said, is this opposition of the time. Now science is opening up for all of these evidences. How did you deal with these temporary antagonism of the time of traditional medicine and of the time? How did you deal with it?
Well,
how was it?
What I learned to do, and I mean this, two things. One is nobody is against success. So I did a lot of things in the hospital, even simple things like playing music in the operating room, say, and people would say, you can't bring in a tape recorder, you're an explosion hazard, it's electrical appliance. But I would bring it in and play the music, and everybody felt better, and the patients recovered faster. So what happens? Everybody starts doing it, see? And so I learned to show by example rather than give a lecture and get into arguments. And the other was I learned to tell stories. Because when you got up in front of doctors and said, here's a study that was, that's poorly controlled. Oh, that journal is not worth anything. But if you got up and said, I want to tell you a story about a patient of mine, they would walk out saying, that was just an anecdote. That was just a case history. See, they weren't going home feeling troubled because they could just say, that was just one patient. But what I found was then they would have something happen, with one of their patients, and they'd start talking to me. And then we'd have a dialogue, and then the doors would open. So several years after the arguments, I was asked to speak to these same physicians who sat there and enjoyed my presentation because of what they had seen happen. And so things that I was criticized for became hospital policy. I got no credit for them. I mean, because patients would come in and say, it's so nice here. Why are they treating me this way? And the answer was, it's hospital policy, and nothing to do with Dr. Siegel. But and as I say, and I'd say this to all who have something different to present, tell stories. Don't try to be too scientific and statistical to convince people, because if they don't believe something, numbers aren't going to change them. Tell stories. And then if a story happens in their life, boom, the wall comes down and the communication starts.
And Dr. Siegel, you also said that during this journey into this revolutionary way of treating patients, which so makes sense to us, you had your support from your wife. It's like a true collaboration. We may feel, even reading from your website. Can you share with us a little more in that regard?
Oh, let me mention, because I had mentioned the music. 30 years after I played music, a study was done showing that if you played music in the operating room, patients needed less anesthesia, the operation finished sooner, they were more comfortable. You think of how many years it took for somebody to say, let's study it. Now, the other aspect, the support of my wife, I mean, she, when we went out speaking, was part of, we spoke together, so to speak. She did comedy so that people could understand the benefits of laughter and how it improved them and how they felt. But the thing that I was given permission to do, you see, by parents, by my wife, and even our children, I could go out and behave differently, but they still loved me. That I had the freedom to be who I was. So I could come home and be accepted. Robert Frost wrote a wonderful sentence. He said, home is a place that when you go there, they have to take you in. So I knew that I would always be accepted and that I could be different. Did I embarrass our children at times? Yes, with my behavior. Even shaving my head back in the 70s. You see, that I didn't understand. I just had this incredible urge. If I'd been in therapy, the therapist might have said to me, did it ever occur to you that you need to uncover your emotions and your spirituality and not your head? And I realized later, in analyzing and understanding myself, that the uncovering was more like a monk. You know what I mean? Uncovering spirituality. But imagine your children with their hair down to their shoulders, and the father goes to the barber and has his head shaved. So, they could put up with that and accept it, because I also gave them permission to be who they wanted to be. So it was not something that I, took for myself. We lived by the same rules in the house, and that way it gave them a certain freedom to be who they wanted to be and to know that they were loved, and that we expressed emotions and feelings and everything else at home. But I think had I not been brought up with that feeling from parents and family and wife, that I don't think I could have done what I did. I don't think I could have gone out and been different in public and on television, all the famous talk shows with people yelling at you and criticizing you. And I don't mean the audience. I mean they'd have other professionals sitting there telling me, what I'm doing wrong and that doesn't make sense and so forth and so on.
Yeah. And then years go by, and now with so much scientific evidence already, it's like you go back there and it's there. It's like Pasteur and the realization and the findings of the germs.
If you went back, say, 100 years, every doctor would have agreed with me because they knew their patients. So they saw how life affected their health. But then you get into the technology, all the antibiotics and chemotherapy and surgery, and you don't talk to the patient about their life anymore or their experience. You give them a diagnosis and you say, here's a pill or here you need an operation. It's never what's going on in your life. There's an ad that appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. It said, I'm depressed, unable to cope. I went to see my physician. He prescribed an antidepressant. I feel, wonderful now. And I wrote the company in the journal. I said, I'm depressed due to tragedy in my family. I go to a doctor. The doctor doesn't even say what happened, what's going on in your life. Couldn't you put that line in the ad? And they canceled the ad. But, to me, that's the sickness of medicine. And the students who go into medicine, and they're a minority because they like people, are in a lot of pain when they get to medical school because they realize it's not about people. We're seeing some changes. I'm happy to see that happen. Some of the schools are far better than others, and even at my college where I went at Colgate, they now have a course for students who are taking pre-medical courses. They have a humanities course. So they're focusing them on the humanities and people and emotions. And I thought that was wonderful to have that put in. And that's what schools need to do. If you become a doctor, you see, a veterinarian said this also. If you become a doctor because you're fascinated by the human body, if you become a veterinarian because you like animals, people, as he said, bring the pets in, and people come in their bodies. So you have to be ready to take care of people. It's not just about, the body, and it makes a difference. And so relationships, there are studies now that show if you feel you have a compassionate doctor, you recover faster than someone who says, no, my doctor isn't compassionate. And relationships, we even now have studies showing if you have a heart attack and go home to a house with a dog, your mortality rate is 1/5 that of people who go home to a house that doesn't have a dog. It was 26% a year later if you didn't have a dog were dead, and 5% had died if you had a dog in the house. So, all these connections, why women live longer than men with the same cancers. Again, it's about relationships. Why Monday morning we have more heart attacks, strokes, and suicides and illnesses, because people don't like their life and their work. And, so all these things are not accidents. They, you can't separate your life from your health.
Exactly. And as you're saying, at the University of Maryland, where I teach, and I am responsible for the program of behavioral sciences to dental students and also have a collaboration with medical students, you're so right. Nowadays, healthcare professionals and students, they still need more resources to understand the depth of relationships, the impact of emotions, especially in our lives. People talk a lot about emotional intelligence, but it's not there in the curriculum yet. Right. It's coming up, as you know better than.
Because one of the things that I don't know where it came from, but that I began to ask patients, number one, I would always say, how can I help you? See, not what's wrong with you or what are you complaining about, but how can I help you? And the other was to say to them, tell me what you're experiencing. Not what is your diagnosis, but what are you experiencing? And I would say to anybody listening to this program, if you've got a headache, ingrown toenail, lost your job, dizzy spells, it doesn't have to be a disaster, but think of the words you would use to describe to someone else what you're experiencing. And then look at those words and say, what else in my life fits those words? So when somebody says draining, okay, what's draining you? Confusion. And one woman said failure. I said, how does that fit your life? Well, my body failed. I have cancer. I said, my question is, how does failure fit your life? Oh, my parents committed suicide when I was a child. That must have been a failure as a child. Boom. Say, I have redirected her life now to help her from that word. And it's amazing to me, the words that pop out of people, and they look at me and they say thank you. And the other is that we have to understand our lives are stored in our bodies, and I mean that literally. We even see it in organ transplants, that we put the memories of the donor into the person receiving the transplant. And there's some fascinating stories and even books written about it. But we have to remember that. The other day, a doctor sent me a picture, because I do a lot of work with dreams and drawings. See, one other thing that doctors are never told. Carl Jung interpreted a dream and correctly diagnosed a brain tumor from the dream. Now, we should tell that to doctors. So they say to patients, what are you dreaming about? Do you have any sense of what's going on? Here, draw a picture from me. So I can show you in pictures that people draw their anatomy. Now, then they don't know what they're drawing, if you know what I mean. A tree, a stream, any structure can be, even sails on a boat that look like a breast. I mean, all these things are very obvious when you know anatomy and you look at them. But, that when you have that sense, that inner wisdom and sense, yes, you can help people by making diagnosis. And as a surgeon, there were times where people would draw healthy pictures, and people would say to me, they need surgery. I'd say, no, I'm waiting and watching, because the way they drew their body was with healthy colors and symbols. And I'd say, we'll wait and watch. And believe me. And then there are other times where I'd say, yes, you're going to the operating room because of what they put in the picture, telling me what was going on and what was wrong.
Dr. Siegel, these the stories about drawings, we want to know more, but just give you one break, and we'll be right back with you. Thank you.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Enrich your spiritual senses and deepen your foundations of Spiritism with the book, What is Spiritism? By Allan Kardec. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
And now we return to our program.
Dear Kardec Radio listener, we are blessed this morning by listening to the very deeply inspirational teachings and experiences of Dr. Siegel. As he says, call me Bernie. And he's here with us sharing a lot of experience. And mostly you can feel the love that comes with his practice of medicine. Something quite unique, because even ourselves, when we teach our students in everyday life, it's quite hard still to bring these teachings to the curriculum. And he was sharing with us about the drawings, how important it is to know more about the life of the patient, to be more resourceful in helping the patient. But Dr. Siegel, one question is, many medical students tell me, for example, but Vanessa, Dr. Angeloni, I am not a psychologist. Why do I need to get into my patient's emotional life? What would you say, Dr. Siegel?
Because their emotional life is their physical life too. You cannot separate the mind and body. So if you're depressed, your internal chemistry is different. Your body is different. Cancer patients who laugh for no reason, this was a study, they were told to laugh several times a day. They lived a longer life than those who didn't laugh. Okay? So, as I said, our relationships, our connections, all these things are physical because they change the body. I mean, when you're happy, yeah, your body's different than when you're sad. When you're fearful, your chemistry is very different. And especially if people live in fear. It's meant to protect you, from something threatening your life so you can run faster, do things, and so forth. But if you live in fear, it tears your body apart because it can't repair itself when it's in that state. And as I say, and the message your genes are getting, that's what the students have to understand also, that if your body is filled with what you might call a negative chemistry, yes, you're more likely to develop diseases because the genes are getting a message that is destructive. They're not getting a survive and thrive message. And all these things become significant. The term I love that came from Solzhenitsyn's book, Cancer Ward, was self-induced healing. He has the men who are sitting on the ward find a book, and one of them says, look, it says here there are cases of self-induced healing, not recovery through treatment. And the symbol was a rainbow-colored butterflies fluttered out of the book. Now, I thought that was fascinating. See, he didn't say there are cases of spontaneous remissions or miracles, which, if it happened, you don't say to a patient, well, how'd you have a spontaneous, or miracle? Because if it's spontaneous and miraculous, then it means the patient had nothing to do with it. But if you said to a patient, what's the story? How did you manage to get better? Say, how did you induce healing? They always had a story. That was the other thing I began to realize. As I began to meet people I thought were dead because they didn't come back to the office, and I'd meet them when I'm out giving a lecture, and I'd say, hello, and they would all start telling me what they did when they went home and why they didn't die. And they became my teachers. And literally, they weren't always profound things. They could be, I'm moving to the mountains of Colorado because I want to die in the mountains. Well, a year later, no invitation to the funeral. I call up, he answered the phone and said, it was so beautiful here, I forgot to die. Now, there are people in Colorado who need to move to the ocean, if you know what I mean. But it was when people did, and I have letters that end with, I didn't die, now I'm so busy I'm killing myself, because they all began to say, I have a certain time left, let me enjoy it. Say, the way one of our kids put it, that I love the term, it's go live your chocolate ice cream. Because I was said to a group of people, if you had 15 minutes to live, what would you do? And our son said, I'd buy a quart of chocolate ice cream and eat it. And I thought, that's wonderful. You're enlightened. But other people were saying to me, wait a minute, what if what I told you is my chocolate ice cream? So it helped me to clarify things, that when people would say things that I thought were nuts to do for your last 15 minutes, but for them, it was joyful. So fine. Go live your chocolate ice cream and watch what happens to your body. But you cannot separate. We're a unit. Mind, body, and spirit are one unit. And as I said, our life's memories are in it, our past is in it. All these things are having their toll on us and the way we live and behave.
That's so interesting, Dr. Siegel. And you're talking about the drawings. And the main question is, did you feel any source of external inspiration when you were giving your steps into this new way of dealing and treating your patients?
Well, I think what Jung said is what it's about. He said the future is unconsciously prepared long in advance and therefore can be guessed by clairvoyance. So, yeah, I'd say my whole career is, from unconscious beliefs, feelings, and decisions, whether it was going to a workshop one day or sitting with my patients who then could talk to me in a different way. I mean, all these simple, small things. You talked about healing. There's a book out now, by the way, called The Energy Cure by William Bengston. He has healed people and mice of cancer with his hands. But you see, I've had these experiences. That's part of what's changed me. I live by my experience, not my belief. I almost choked to death as a 4-year-old. I left my body. I know about a near-death experience. I was very upset that I didn't die when I was 4 years old, because it was fascinating to be out of my body, free of the pain of choking on a toy that I'd aspirated. I had a past life experience spontaneously when a friend said over the phone, "Why are you living this life?" And it amazed me. I mean, this is a phone call. She said, "Why are you living this life?" And I saw myself with a sword in my hand, killing. And my reaction was, maybe that's why I'm a surgeon, to help people with a knife. But so, when these things happen and you're not even looking for them, or being healed by someone. I had an injury, my wife too. And Olga Worrell, who was a healer years ago, my wife went over to her and said, "Can you help Bernie?" Because I thought it was all nuts. I'm at a medical meeting. She was a lecturer, talking about healing, and I'm limping around with a painful leg. And my wife said, "Go ask her." I said, "Honey, that makes no sense." Well, Olga walked over, put her hands on my leg, and it was like 2 hot irons, the energy that flowed through her. And 5 minutes later, I got up, walked away perfectly well. We were in the Netherlands many years ago. My wife had injured her back, could barely walk. I was wheeling her around in a wheelchair to go to the lectures and things. So all the doctors saw her problem. And I'm giving a lecture, and at the end of it, she gets up and comes walking down to me saying, Bernie. I said, "What is it?" And everybody's looking at her. How come she's fine now? Turns out that there was a healer in the audience. He was allowed in because his daughter was a nurse. All the doctors thought he's a nut. He's healing at people. Well, he happened to sit next to my wife, saw that she was in pain. So he said, "Sit a minute." And he put his hands on her. And 5 minutes later, she's fine. And every doctor in the room had to accept that, you see. It changed all of them, because this is not, a made-up story. They saw it happen. And so, again, I accept all these things. And what I try to say to doctors is, don't say I can't accept it or I can't believe it. Say I can't understand it or I can't explain it. That's very different. I always say astronomers and quantum physicists are easy to talk to because they don't have the answers to everything going on in the universe, but they're open to exploring. And that's what I feel we should all be doing. And literally, I keep writing letters to the editor because I wish we would take the money we used in outer space and study inner space. Just think about this for a minute. What if we had spent all the money that we have spent going into outer space on studying the human body and inner space and how our body works, see? And why disease occurs and how genes are affected and on and on. I mean, to me, it's more fascinating about what's in me than what's out there. But I think we're more afraid to go into ourselves and our emotions and feelings and everything else. It's easier to go out in space, and be free of the personal issues and the emotional issues.
Dr. Siegel, there is a friend of ours who is here, Mauricio Filho. He's the president of the United States Spiritist Council, and he was just sharing that your words just inspire us to realize how much the spiritual world, if we can say it this way, can positively influence also the healing of one's physical body. Do you have any specific experience in that regard, besides the one you just mentioned, other ones regarding how they operate through you to help also heal the patients?
I think what all the healers are saying is that they're, like Al Gore and others would say to me, that they are, it's not them, if you know what I mean, but it's like the universal energy, that they're simply conducting it. You know, the way a wire would carry electricity, they are focusing it and bringing it to you. And that it is not their power, but the universal power. And that's why that comment, you know, was Jesus the only normal person? So that if we said, yeah, we have the same potential Jesus had, okay, yes, let us focus it and use it. But you see, where is your mind is another part of that. I'm impressed by the symbolism of the still pond, that when do you see your true reflection? When the water is still. Then the ugly duckling becomes a swan. The tiger who's brought up by goats sees that he's really a tiger, not a goat. Where? Looking in the still pond. But if there's turbulence in your life, you never communicate with this mystic, spiritual sense. I mean, I hear voices talk to me. I've had, incredible experiences that have changed my life because a voice will talk to me. I mean, two simple examples. The day my father was going to die, a voice said to me when I was out walking, how did your parents meet? I said, I don't know. Then ask your mother when you get to the hospital. I walk in, and the voice said through me to my mother. And remember, my father's dying. My mother's sitting next to him. You think you'd walk in the room and hug somebody, shed a tear, be compassionate. I walk in and say, how did you two meet? And I don't have time to tell you all the stories, but they had, it was just crazy. I mean, the end of the first story was my father lost a coin toss and had to take my mother out. So when she finished telling the stories, my father died laughing, and it became an incredibly beautiful day. Then I've written a book called Buddy's Candle to help people deal with the loss of a loved one. I walk out of my house to take our other dog for a walk, and a voice said to me, go to the animal shelter. So I drove right to the shelter. I walk in, there's a dog sitting there. The voice said, what's his name? And the person sitting there said, his name is Buddy. He's been here less than 15 minutes. I said, I'm here to take him home. And I did. See, so things like that have happened to me. I also have a mystic friend, what made me a believer, who said, Bernie, now that I know you're not different, you're different, because she was my patient. She said, I have messages for you. And she brought me messages from dead patients. She knew their names, and she spoke the way they spoke, used certain expressions. And their families were always shocked, because when I call and say I have a message, they'd say, that's what he said every time he left your meeting. These were things that, opened my mind. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross became a very good friend of mine. She's the one who got me into drawing. At her workshop, I drew a picture of an outdoor scene for my meditation. And she said to me, Bernie, why is 12 important? I said, why are you asking? You have 12 trees. Oh, yeah, I've been doing this 12 months. Bernie, what are you covering up? What do you mean? You put snow on the mountain. I said, yeah, it's a mountain with snow. She said, Bernie, the page is white. You took a white crayon and added a layer. What are you covering up? And it was all my emotions and feelings. But when she was done, I thought, this is ridiculous. I draw this crazy little picture, and she knows about my life. So that's why I went back to the hospital with a box of crayons and worked with patients. You see, and again, what proved this to me? I have no idea about art therapy, but I discovered incredible amounts of things. When I wrote articles for journals, they came back from the medical journal saying it's interesting, but it's inappropriate for the journal. So I sent them to her as appropriate, and it came back again saying, yes, it's appropriate, but it's not interesting. We know all this. See, that got me angry, too, that you go through all these years of medical school, and nobody even talks to you about a dream or a drawing or anything else. So, I realized, but you see, what I realized also was how consistent it was. They didn't say, you got this right and that wrong and this. There was total consistency. And then I began to meet with Jungian therapists who did artwork and learned from them. And one, Susan Bach, who wrote a book called Life Paints Its Own Span, said to me, Jung was always fascinated by the somatic aspects of the drawings. And I said to her, because you're a psychologist, he's a doctor, he knows anatomy, so you don't see things that he or I would see in a drawing. And, those were the fascinating things that we saw. I don't know, that mentioned to you some doctor, I think I started to say this, she sent me a drawing of a broken heart, a heart shape with a crack down the middle and 22 drops of blood beneath it. And I said to the doctor, ask the woman who drew this, who has a chronic problem, what happened when she was 22. And I got an email back, a full page of things that happened to this woman during her 22nd year of life, from death to relationship problems to all kinds of things. And it, again, blew the doctor's mind, that I look at this picture and say, what happened when she was 22? Because it's not an accident that she made 22 drops of blood. And so those things are stored in us. As Jung said, numbers have meaning and quantity. And it's the way we store our memories through those things.
Dr. Siegel, I could stay here just listening to you nonstop, but we'll add one element to our reflection, because it's about reflections, as you said, on the art of living and healing. And at the beginning of the show, before we called you, we were sharing a case on, as you said, you talked about patients who came back and talked. And at Kardec's time, he also got through the mediums of the time these people who came back. In this case, it was a woman who was actually a patient, and she went through a very difficult disease, and the treatments at the time in the 19th century were very complex and complicated. So she suffered a lot, probably more from the treatments than the disease itself. And then the mentor, when after her death, her daughter, who became a spiritist, brought in the name, and they evoked the spirit, and the spirit mentor of the lady actually came back to tell us some of the reasons why she went through that difficult process in life. Let's listen to it now, and we're back with you for some comments.
All right.
Your mother had been a good male physician in the past, living amidst surroundings that made it easy to live well, and in which he lacked no gifts or praise. Greedy for glory and riches, and wanting to reach the pinnacle of his science, not with a view to relieving his brothers, for he was no philanthropist, but with a view to increasing his reputation and clientele. He didn't hesitate to do anything to reach his objectives. His mother was martyred on her bed of suffering, because he was attempting to do a study on the convulsions which he himself caused. His son was subjected to experiments which he hoped would give him the key to certain phenomena. The elderly saw their lives being shortened, and healthy persons felt weakened by experiments meant to prove the effectiveness of this or that potion. All these experiments were performed on unsuspecting, unfortunate patients. The satisfaction of greed and pride, the thirst for gold and fame, were the motives behind such conduct. Many centuries and dreadful trials were needed to tame this ambitious, pride-filled spirit, until repentance began its work of regeneration. The reparation has come to an end, for the trials of her last existence may even be regarded as mild compared to those she bore in the past. Take heart, then, because if her punishment has been long and cruel, the reward bestowed upon her for her resignation, patience, and humility will be great. Have courage, all you who suffer. Consider the brevity of material existence. Think about the joys of eternity. Call upon hope that devoted friend of all suffering hearts. Call upon faith, its sister, which shows you the heaven where hope allows you to enter beforehand. Also, call upon those friends whom the Lord has provided you, who surround you, who uphold and love you, and whose constant solicitude leads you back to the one whom you have offended by transgressing the divine laws. After her death, Mrs. B dictated communications either to her daughter or to the Parisian Spiritist Society, which reflected the most eminent qualities and which confirmed what had been said about her previous history.
And here we are, dear listener. This is an amazing and compelling case. Tells us so much. Dr. Siegel, what are your thoughts regarding the possibility of cases such as this?
Well, I mean, I've had communications from the dead, from patients who have died. Even when I've been out, again, get a message, come home, and I'd say to my wife, one of my patients died, I'm not sure who the name was. And then the phone would ring a few minutes later, and I'd be told what happened. But they were saying goodbye. My parents, my mystic friend, her name is Monica, called me and said, and she doesn't live near me or have any way of knowing what happened, but my father died, then my mother died, and she called and said, you folks are together, they're proud of you, and they're being shown around by someone who loves cigarettes and chocolate. She said, oh, it's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she's showing you folks around. And, I mean, that kind of stuff blows my mind because Monica has no idea about my life, my parents' life, my relationship with with Elizabeth. And the other, let me add this, that was really amazing, because my simple way of saying it is that consciousness is not local. So what we call past lives, my explanation of that is that when I'm born, I am impregnated by the consciousness of what has preceded me. So we each may pick up different experiences from that consciousness, which can affect our lives. You know, it's like a 4-year-old who plays the piano, and you say, how does that happen? Well, maybe he's got the consciousness of a pianist, from the past. But anyway, I was out giving a lecture one night and noticed that the outline I had, I was not doing anything I had written down or saying anything, but it was coming out very nicely. So I just let it go and let it happen for a couple hours. When I was done, lady walks up, says, I've heard you before, that was better than usual. And the next lady said, standing in front of you for the entire lecture was a man, so I drew his picture for you. And what she handed me blew my mind, because in the picture I drew for Elizabeth, I drew my inner guide. His name is George. And I meet him in my meditation. And he's got a beard and a full head of hair. He had a little cap on his head, which I didn't understand. I learned later was a prayer cap and that he's a rabbi. And he has a gown on. And this woman draws him. And then, many years later, I spoke at a Sunday sermon at a funeral service for a friend. I'm standing in an empty hallway. A healer comes up to me and says, are you Jewish? I said, why are you asking? Because I speak at a Sunday, sermon, gave a Sunday sermon at the funeral. He said, no, there's a rabbi standing next to you. Now, we're standing in an empty hallway, okay? And he described the same person with the beard and everything else. So, when those mystical events happen, and I guess people aren't afraid to come up to me and say it because they know I'm not going to reject them or say it's crazy. Those things change my view of life and the nature of life. And I hope you have time. Let me add a little bit of sense of humor, too, because there are 4 times in my life that I could have been killed. I mean, really, choking to death, 2 serious auto accidents, and falling off the roof when a ladder broke. And so I was giving a lecture one night, and I mentioned that these things had happened. And each time I'd get up and walk away with no serious injury. And I said, I must have an angel. And the man came up and he said, you do have an angel, and I know his name. I said, what are you talking about? He said, what did you say when the ladder broke? I said, oh, shit. He said, that's your angel's name. And I'll tell you, you see, what that man did for me years ago was help me get through a lot of stressful events because, you know, you'll be stuck in traffic, you almost have an accident, something happens and you yell, oh, shit, and then I end up laughing. I mean, really, on my bike once, I hit a sheet of ice, went flying through the air, yelled, oh, shit, and I'm flying through the air laughing. When I hit the ground, I was so relaxed, I just got up, got back on the bike, and off I went. Not even a ache or pain. But, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, but I say to people, again, a lot of this is happening at an unconscious level. And that's why if you're constantly thinking, worrying, you never get into that place to get on your true path and to understand where you're supposed to be and what's supposed to happen. And again, yes, I can help people when they do a drawing, you know. Should I be a doctor or a plumber or put it on paper. Where should I live? What school should I go to? Who should I marry? So or to get back to treatments, you see, you say, I'm going to have an operation next week, and it's a horror. You know, you draw a black box with nobody taking care of you. Now, you can either not have surgery, or you can, through the use of imagery and meditation, change the view, and then a week later draw a beautiful picture, because by visualizing it as successful, your body has a different experience. On the other hand, this is the important part. See, people say, I don't want to have radiation or chemotherapy or surgery, and they draw beautiful pictures. And I say to them, your intuition knows it's good for you. Go, you'll do well. And, you know, when you talked earlier, you asked me about mind and body. Let me tell you how powerful the mind is. You are put in front of a radiation therapy machine. A month later, they do a routine inspection on the machine, and they realize that there is no radioactive material in the machine, because when they had repaired it, they never put it back in. The doctor, the radiation therapist, said to me how terrible he felt. I said, you'd have to be an idiot to not realize what you're saying. He said, what do you mean? What am I saying? I said, you must have had tumor shrinking and patients with side effects because they thought they were being radiated. Or you would have realized the machine isn't working. And he said, oh, my God, you're right. So think about that. See, you believe something, and your body has it happen. Now, we have other studies recently in some magazine I was reading called Painful Pessimism. They put an IV in people who are have chronic pain. They said, we're going to intermittently put a medication in, and we'll tell you when and ask you how you're feeling. And they never put anything in. They just let the IV run. But they would say, okay, we're putting it in. Oh, I feel better. All right, it's all cut off now. Oh, the pain's coming back. It was so obvious, again, to what the person believed and what was happening. See? Now, but let me go one step further. Does healing really work? People were put in like a little closet with a hole in the wall, and they put their arm out. A cut was made in their arm, like 2 inches long. Then half of them were worked on by a healer. The other half were not. They do not know what's happening to them. All they know is I'm putting my arm out. But those who were worked on by the healer healed faster. So there, you see, their expectation was not the issue, but that the effect of the healer really made a difference. So all these things enter into it. And this is why it's hard to determine sometimes what treatments are effective, because if people travel halfway around the world to get something done and get better, maybe it's them and their motivation has nothing to do with the treatment.
Exactly.
So, that's why, as a physician, there are many things. I don't mind people getting better, but, if they say, is this good for me, will that help? I can't answer. I try to see if they're motivated, and if they're motivated, then okay, yes. But if they're complaining about the treatment or how much money it costs to go to some, center somewhere, it's unlikely it's going to help them.
Exactly. And Dr. Siegel, when we are talking about spirituality and everything, we have put together, and we want to share this with our listener because we have a friend of ours, Mackenzie Mello, who is from Massachusetts and is the main moderator of the course on e-spiritism. It's the course on these teachings online. We are going to open the line. He's going to say a few words and also ask a question to you. Hello,
right.
Mackenzie. How are you?
Hi, Vanessa. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for joining us, and we are sharing with our listeners that you are the main moderator of this amazing course online, e-spiritism. Can you tell us a little bit about it before you make your question to Dr. Siegel, please?
Yeah, a few years ago, actually a year and a half, almost 2 years now, we decided to, together with you, to put this online course, and we called it e-spiritism. Was from a trip that you made to here to Massachusetts, and we had this idea, and like a week later, less than a month later, the course was online. And since then, we had a few graduations, if we could call that, from the first and the second modules, and we have a few friends that are actually doing the course, and it's kind of a fun course to do. You have some quizzes to answer. The quizzes are not that difficult, but you have to nail all of them to go ahead with the course. And then after answering the quizzes, you go to the essay questions. And those are the ones who are actually moderated by me, and sometimes when we don't have time, we ask for your help, which is always very welcome. And Daniel, too, from the SSB, it's the Spirited Society of Baltimore, he goes on there sometimes and grade some essays, too, when we too heavy on stuff to do, so we ask for help. And
it's an amazing.
It's been.
And Mackenzie, let me share this because Dr. Siegel is here with us, and we have, as a coincidence or not, a session on our students. Let's say this way, they make drawings as well to express the spiritual teachings. Can you tell us a little bit on what you learned from it, and then jump into a question to Dr. Siegel, please?
Well, let me go first to my question. Well, it's not mainly a question. A few months ago, probably last year, I wrote in a small piece for the Spiritist magazine that's called I don't recall. I know it has nails on the title of it, and it actually talks about space and the placebo effect. That similar to what he was just mentioning a few minutes ago, about the belief, when the person really believes that something will happen to her, and then the body actually reacts to that. So in Spiritism, we see that as faith, as Jesus said, if we have faith of the size of a grain of mustard, we would move that mountain. And that looks like this placebo effect, although, of course, we have to bow our heads to the physicians and to all the doctors who really strive to get new medicine out there, and that really helps people. But we are really aware that the placebo effect is actually very, very effective. So my question to him is, how would he weigh on this, on the effect of actually the medicine itself against the placebo effect? I mean, let's put it in terms of percentage if he wants to, but like 30%, 50%. What is how much is the?
Yeah, it's
the
roughly it's roughly about 30%. That if 30% of people did well with a certain treatment, the likelihood is that it's related to their belief in it. For instance, when they were testing Rogaine, hair growing, and they had a placebo, 40% of the men responded to the Rogaine, 30% responded to the placebo. See, my comment is they should have put the placebo on the market and charged a lot less. And then if you had hip grow, say, okay, now go buy the Rogaine. But, yeah, so about 30%. See, I have a term. I call it deceiving people into health. I lie to people regularly as a doctor. You say, why do you lie to me? So for their benefit. You see, I did a lot of children's surgery. My words were very powerful to these children. They knew I cared about them. I was an authority. And what woke me up was noticing something. You'd say to children in the emergency room, when we get to the operating room and you go into the operating room, you'll fall asleep. You'll go to sleep. Now, I'm thinking about anesthesia, see? The children, when we wheeled them in, fell asleep on the stretcher they were on. They fell asleep going into the room. And I realized that's what you told them would happen. And some of them got mad at me for waking them up because they'd say, I sleep on my stomach and you're turning me over, because they had appendicitis and I had to turn them over. But, so I realized then if my words mean that much, let me use them in a positive way. I would take an alcohol sponge. I'd rub a child's arm. I'd say, this is going to numb your skin. You will not feel the needle. And you see, that's where a third of the kids said to me, wow, thank you. Why don't the other doctors do that? And the other kids would say, it hurt, but the emotional fear was gone. So, then, hey, the needle hurt. That must have been a bad sponge. I won't, we'll get a new one next time. So, again, I had no problem with that. And I would say to parents, look, your child's having surgery, chemotherapy, get a bottle of vitamins, label it, hair-growing pills, anti-nausea pills, whatever side effects you want to avoid. Then you give your child a vitamin, and believe me, it's more than 30% when it's the parents and the doctor saying it because they have faith in those authorities. And we had one woman who has a visual problem, and she didn't have her glasses and was feeling sick after chemotherapy. So she called her daughter to say, get me my Compazine, anti-nausea pill. Daughter shows up, gives her a pill, boom, 10 minutes, she's feeling fine. 4 or 5 hours later, I'm feeling sick again, get me another pill. But now she's got her glasses on. Daughter hands her a pill. She says, what are you doing? This is my anticoagulant, Coumadin. She said, Mom, it had a C on it. I thought it was Compazine. That's what I gave you 4 hours ago. So here she is, cured of her nausea by an anticoagulant because she thinks she's getting the right thing. And, again, there's nothing wrong with training doctors to use that power. The psychiatrist and hypnotherapist Milton Erickson, his work is wonderful because he had polio as a child, so he had to live with disability and realized how important one's attitude and words are. But if doctors were trained in hypnotherapeutic techniques, they would know how to talk to people. See, even in the operating room, anesthesiologists will say, you'll be going out. And I would think, if you're going out of control, that's scary. So I would immediately say, when was the last time you went out on a date to the patient? And suddenly there's a smile on their face, and they're thinking of something pleasant rather than something fearful. And over and over again, I think those are things that I began to learn. Oh, even a sense of humor. These are true stories. I got to tell you this one. A lady is in total panic. I can't even get her into the operating room. And I spent 45 minutes trying to calm her down, and I realized it's hopeless. So I said to her, we have to go ahead. And I wheel her into the operating room. And she looks around at all the people waiting and says, thank God, all these wonderful people are going to take care of me. And I thought, if I agree with her, it's not going to mean a damn thing, So I said to her, loud enough for everybody to hear, I've worked with these people for years. I know them. They are not wonderful people. Well, in about 10 seconds, she looked at me. First, I thought she was going to run down the hall, but then she just burst out laughing. See, and the minute you laugh, you can't be afraid anymore. And the room became family. Everybody's laughing. She feels safe and secure. So I learned to bring humor in, and what I call childlike humor, not rude, not threatening or putting down anyone, but just things we could all laugh at. And then people found it very hard to be afraid because they were laughing.
Dr. Siegel, so much to thank you for this amazing and inspirational answer, and thank you, Mackenzie, for being there and joining us and for this amazing work. with all of us, and I know Daniel and I and you have been working on your spirits, there's much more to know. And now we're going to open the line. We have two more callers here. One is Jay. Jay, hello. We are opening the line for you. What is your question to Dr. Siegel?
Dr. Siegel, I'll call you Bernie instead. Hello, Bernie. How's it going?
Hi. Okay.
Hey, my question is regarding some spiritual concepts that usually not presented themselves when we're actually young, but in older we tend to not do them. And I just wonder how forgiveness plays a part in our healing. You were talking about, the stuff that you were talking about, laughter and things like that, but does forgiveness play a big part in healing? And actually, the messages that you get, and my second question is the message that you get, the visual messages from people that passed over, do you tell them about it's okay to, I forgive you and things like that?
The forgiveness, I always say, if you try to forget, you don't get what you want. But when you forgive, you give yourself a gift. Love is blind because it doesn't see faults. So I always say, kill with kindness and torment with tenderness. Say that when people are driving you crazy, say I love you, and they don't know what to do with you. And the other is that if I'm here for a limited amount of time, I decide what I think and feel. See, I don't give my power away. And through forgiveness, I free myself. Because I know we're all wounded. You see, that's the part that helps me most. I know everybody's life story. There's nobody on this planet who doesn't have wounds. And if you want to learn that for real, put a bandage over your eye and go to the supermarket tomorrow and watch how many people talk to you about their troubles. And so if you know everybody's wounded, you can understand. And with understanding, it's a lot easier to forgive. And then when you can love, you free yourself and others. And let me put this on a practical level, because we had our hotel room robbed. I mean, let me first say, my wife and I came out of our hotel room, saw this weird-looking guy standing in the hallway. And I thought, this is really strange. Why does a man stand in a hallway in a hotel? But, I didn't stop to think he's a robber. So we go to get dinner, come back, our room has been robbed. And opened with a key. I don't mean broken into. And I realized he was waiting for us to go. And he has the key to that room, and he stole. Now, I spent a lot of time wishing I were back in the hallway so I could get even with him for what he did. And then I realized he's still robbing you. And it happened to be Christmas time. And what crazy thought pops in my head? Well, maybe he used what he stole to buy his kids some nice Christmas presents because he doesn't have any money. And when I thought that, I thought, gee, if I meet him, I'll give him another $100 so he really gets something nice for his kids. And I found myself smiling. And I was free from that moment on. And this really happened, too. One of our sons had a robbery at his house. And I happened to be over there when he realized that it had happened. And he's on the phone with the police, all upset and angry. I said, calm down. I said, this guy hasn't bought his mother a birthday present in 20 years. Now that he's robbed you, he can get his mother a gift. And our son, looked at me like, Dad, are you insane? But his face changed. A smile appeared. And so no longer was this a painful experience for him, but a crazy experience because of his father. And I think in a sense, the love and the forgiveness allow us to be free so that people then aren't still robbing us. That's the way I put it. See, if I keep remaining bitter and resentful and then they're still robbing me of my lifetime. And it's my time. I want to be in charge of it and what's happening in my life and not let my bitterness and resentment and anger take over. I'm not saying there's an appropriate anger. If I'm not treated with respect, I let people know I don't like how I'm being treated. But I can still say I love you, but I don't like how you're treating me. Well, Martin Luther King Jr. said this. He said, it's a good thing Jesus told us to love one another because there are some people I can't like. So, but if you understand what made them that way, what were their parents like? What have they lived through in their life? Then it gets easier to forgive. And since I know everybody's life story, it's easier for me to understand and forgive.
Great wisdom and knowledge over the years. Thank you so much.
All right.
event with Divaldo Franco, and it was a very inspirational day with Dr. Petrillo, Dr. Knoplock, and many others, sponsored by the Hospital of Norwalk. Can you share a little bit how you felt that evening?
Well, it always feels good. Let's put it that way. I mean, to have that, because I sense, when I say consciousness isn't local, you can feel it when you go into people's homes, churches, synagogues, hospitals. I mean, if there's compassion, spirit, love there, the room feels different. And, when you have a meeting like that, the people who come bring that kind of consciousness with them and spirit with them. So it feels good to be in that room and with those people. And, we help to heal each other. The Jewish religion, they always say that every visitor takes away a percentage of your disease. They can't cure you, but they take something away. And I think when you come to a meeting like that, their healing goes on in the room just with your presence and being there. And what I found was, as a speaker, there are times I can talk for a few hours, let's say to a professional group, and be exhausted. But then you go to a spiritual meeting and you talk for 2 hours and you're not tired at all because the audience is giving you something. And I've had that happen too. I'd forgotten this. I had laryngitis years ago and could hardly speak. And I said, I had to speak for a whole weekend, a workshop. And I said to people, you need to heal me. I'm not going to make it through the week. I'm going to be able to talk if I am not healed. Well, we started Saturday with me whispering. We finished Sunday afternoon, and my voice was normal. Now, I always felt that the audience are the ones who healed me because I never gave my voice a chance to rest, but something went on, and it was what they gave to me. So that has always impressed me, that the audience makes an enormous difference.
Yes, it does. And
Dr. Siegel.
And Dr. Siegel, finally we got here Kirsten, who is actually a nurse, and she's a spiritist. She wants to ask you a question. Hello, Kirsten.
Hello, Vanessa, and hello, Dr. Siegel.
Yes, ma'am.
How are you? Quick question for you. As Vanessa just said, I am a nurse, and I do work in intensive care unit, and I actually come across a lot of oncology patients. So what recommendations as a healthcare professional would you have in terms of dealing with my patients on a spiritually therapeutic level? Because I try to use therapy communication when I'm treating them in the process, but I feel that something else needs to be developed and was wondering if you had any insights or suggestions or tips you could give me.
Well, one is to let them know that, God is a resource. It's not about religion, but my definition of God is intelligent, loving, conscious energy, and that is built into our body, and for them to seek their potential, their ability to heal, it's built into us. I mean, I often compare it to the fact that bacteria can change their genes and resist antibiotics, that if we have the quiet, peaceful mind, our body does what, and we love our life, our body does everything it can to keep us alive. The other is that there's an awful lot of guilt related to religion, and I won't get into some of the famous clergy who, when you say, does God want you to have cancer, they may answer yes or possibly, because now it'll make you more spiritual. But my comment to people is, if you lose your car keys, does God want you to walk home? And they say, I would go look for my car keys. Well, then, if you lose your health, let us help you find it. So to make sure that they see it in that way. See, I'm not being punished. It's not what I did wrong. You lost something, and we're going to help you find it and restore it. And I have a question for you.
Dr. Yes.
Can I ask her a question?
Yes, sure.
All right. You are asked to do something you do not want to do by friends, family, or patient. What would you say to them?
I'd probably say that I was not comfortable doing it.
Good for you. No,
yeah,
the reason I say that, most nurses have a hard time saying no because they're busy nursing and saving the world. And that's an important survival lesson for everybody. If you don't want to do something, it's okay to say no. Otherwise, you're saying no to yourself. And the line I love is, which you might use with your patients too. If they say, what should I do? What treatment? Let your heart make up your mind. So they pay attention to their feelings. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siegel. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Kirsten, for joining us. And we have one more caller, Dr. Siegel. Hello, dear caller. What's your name, please?
Hi, Vanessa.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, it's Selenia. How are you doing?
Hi, Selenia. Welcome in, and please, you may ask your question to Dr. Siegel.
Yes. If you, Dr. Siegel, thank you, first of all, for everything. It's just been a pleasure, and it's been a great show today. And I just wanted to ask you, if you were going through treatment, which one, what would you, if you were told you have cancer, what kind of treatment would you go for?
Well, it's not an easy answer because it would depend on, what kind of cancer, what the options were, and everything else. But my statement is the treatments, to me, would all be holistic. In other words, yes, I might use, let me take a step back. This friend of mine who does, energy cure said it's easier to cure people who haven't been treated. And I think the problem there is that the energy is then helping them get over their treatment, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, restore the body, whereas if the body is in good health, it's easier to eliminate the disease. But what I look at is what I call the holistic approach. What I look at supplements, nutrition, many things that affect cancer cells that are not, prescription items, as well as looking into radiation, chemotherapy, and so forth. Because I see people who get radiated and have no side effects at all. Quote, I get out of the way and let it go to my tumor. See, so these are people who are totally at peace, seeing all this as a gift from God. There are people who draw God as the X-ray machine, see, and beautiful purple and yellow rays coming out and touching their tumor, or the chemotherapy is a golden liquid flowing to their cancer. And yes, there are others who have red and black, and you look like you're in a cage and trapped. So to me, all my options are open, but I decide. To me, that's the key. It's not the doctor writing a prescription or my family saying you have to do this, we don't want you to die. I say, this is me, my life. I will decide what I'm going to do and what feels right for me, and then go ahead. And this is why I often say to people, draw a picture, because I want your intuition and your intellect to agree with each other so you don't have conflict when you go in. It's not your head saying, well, I need this, and you feel like, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever going to happen. See, there's one woman who drew the devil giving her poison as chemotherapy. And the disease is an insect. Well, you're never going to get rid of every insect, and who wants to have the devil give you poison as treatment? So all these things need to be looked at. But I'd say keep the options open and do what feels right for you.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. Yes,
thank you, Selenia. Thank you so much for joining us and asking your question, making us open up more lines of reflection. Dr. Siegel, let me call you our dear, funny, and wise, loving doctor. We'd like to hear your final comments after this amazing, very moving interview with you. Can you share with us your final thoughts for the Kardec Radio listener?
What are my final thoughts? Well, I think the most important thing for each of us is to really remember we're here for a limited amount of time, and to enjoy your lifetime. And how do you decide? By feelings. What will make you happy was what my mother used to say when I say, what should I do? What will make you happy? So pay attention to that. And it's not being selfish. It's not just thinking about yourself, but what do you enjoy doing? How do you want to contribute love to the world so that you don't you don't lose your life doing what others tell you to do. You're doing what feels right for you. And then your life becomes meaningful and enjoyable.
Dr. Siegel, thank you so much. And it was an honor for all of us to have you here, to spend your time sharing with us so many teachings. And we hope in the future you will have more time to share with us more stories, more insights, more inspiration. Dear Kardec Radio listener, thank you for being with us. And next week we come back. It's a special show also. It's a show about American Spiritists and what's happening in regard to the Spiritist dissemination. In the future shows, we have Dr. Carol Bowman, we have Dr. Stephen Post, Dr. Radiger, and many others who will join us to share what's happening at their end and how they are making a difference in the world. And we'll be back next week at 11 a.m. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.